Alright, once again, another deck profile. A deck profile that I kind of have been holding off for a while ever since set 8, because set 10 had to show us a new cover card for Drajeweled, and I just had to wait for then. So here we are with a new updated Drajeweled Magnus Ignis deck, because I am not playing this as a pure Magnus deck, as I am combining it with Ignis. Basically, it's going to be the Magnus stuff for the ride line, and still playing it with the Ignis stuff, because Magnus itself is not as great as Ignis, but Magnus itself is definitely still better than the original ride line, with its design pretty much the same as the original, with just a little bit of green. So when it comes to the new Drajeweled stuff, it practically plays the same as the original stuff with few inherent weaknesses, but a little better as well. That's basically what it is. As we get a new version, we got to have it better than the original, but definitely not better than what we got when it comes to Ignis, as if you get rid of Ignis, it makes the deck lose a very powerful engine that practically needs Ignis to be run. But with the new Magnus, there are many ways that you could actually kind of build the deck fun enough. If you want to build it with Magnus as your main Vanguard and use Ignis as an engine, it's doable. If you're going to play this as a pure Magnus deck with no Ignis, it might be very lackluster in comparison. But if you have existing Ignis stuff, which you realistically should do if you bought the Master deck set, I'd rather still play it with the Ignis stuff, especially making Ignis as your main final Vanguard, as your main finisher, with Magnus as basically your early game first grade 3 ride. And that's exactly how I built it, because Ignis itself to me is still just way better than what Magnus is, which will be explained later. But when it comes to the deck's playstyle, it practically does the same thing. Soul Blast 4 cards with different grades, and most of your cards are linked to Soul Blasting 4 or more cards at the same time to activate their effects, and then with Drajeweld's case, change their power by shrinking it down. Although in this case now, it's going to be pure 0, because there's going to be no draining down to 1. So that already makes it better than the original Drajeweled. But anyway, with all that out of the way, let's just begin, because Drajeweled is awesome. So first off, we got the new ride line, Julius Draco Kid Glow. You have to run this one for the new ride line, unfortunately, so you can't choose in between. And then we go to Jewel Core Dragon Glint. When your Jewel Neo rides on top of it, the new one, you look at top 5 cards of deck to choose up to 2 cards from among them to put to Soul. The original Jewel Core Dragon actually superior calls itself from Soul, and then on attack or boosting plus 5k, and then puts itself back to Soul. So depending on personal preferences, you might want the early game attacker or the choice Soul Charging. Personally for me, I think the choice Soul Charging is better, because sometimes by the time you hit grade 3, you won't have the 4 grade 3s in Soul, so this just adds more consistency rather than having the early game attacker. And I think consistency is more important than the early game pressure. So this is just my personal preference, but if you prefer the early game pressure, go ahead and run the original ride line, in which we run the new Jewel Neo Luster. So just like the original one, when your grade 3 Drajeweled rides on top of it, you Soul Charge 1, and then if you have the Jewel Core Dragon Glint in Soul, you draw a card. It's basically similar to the original one, but it requires you to have 3 different grades in Soul, which you're just going to have anyway because it's 0, 1, and 2. But it's basically Soul Charge 1, draw a card when you ride your grade 3, basically. But it has the second skill where if your Vanguard is Drajeweled Magnus plus 5k, but you're not going to really use that. But sometimes it is there if you do need it. So that's just on personal preferences, but you're not going to do it for that, just for the ride deck. In which we go to the new Drajeweled Magnus, which, spoiler alert, I do not run Persona Ride for this one, because I'm focusing on Ignis. But it is personal preferences if you want to do the Persona Ride. So it has 3 skills in comparison to the original Drajeweled with 2 skills. So first off, at the beginning of your ride phase, choose 2 cards from your drop zone to put to Soul. Original Drajeweled lets you counterblast 1 to just straight up Soul Charge 2, and if they're different grades to draw a card. So timing wise, it can be a little awkward because it has to be beginning of ride phase in comparison to original Drajeweled that can also potentially draw your card. But it does let you choice Soul Charge, and considering that your ride line already choice Soul Charges, it might be okay. But also because during your beginner ride phase, you Soul Charge 2 and then you ride Ignis, which will give you a total of 3 Soul. Ignis can give you 2 more Soul, which will actually fulfill Ignis's condition right off the bat on the first grade 3 ride if you do need it. But most of the time you already have the Soul, but it's just here for additional support. Now the second skill is a completely new skill that Drajeweled doesn't really have, unless if you're talking about Ignis technically. At the beginning of your battle phase, if your Soul has a Drajeweled plus 5k power to your whole front row, this actually made me debate whether I want to run more copies of Drajeweled, but personally, I'm not using it for this skill overall, but it is there if you want to use it. But if you're playing this as a pure Magnus deck, you will be losing a Persona Ride, so that does kind of suck a bit. But on a Persona Ride turn, it's basically plus 15k power total, because by default you get the plus 5k and then the temporary 10k power buff, but Ignis also gets plus 15k total, so that is just personal preferences on what you prefer. But I still think the Ignis will be better, which will be explained why. In which the final skill, just like the original Drajeweled, on attack you can Soul Blast 4 cards with different grades, choose one of your opponent's Vanguards, and drain its power to 0, and then if your opponent's Vanguard is at least grade 3, crit +1, and if you do get this crit, you can choose one Demonic Jewel Dragon Rearguard, and it gets this skill in your turn, aka choose one of your grade 3 Jewel Dragons, basically. And then the skill it gets is that when it attacks, you can discard a card from your hand to give it one drive check. So basically, it's a better version of the original Drajeweled, as original Drajeweled only just Soul Blasts 4 to drain to 1, and also just crit +1. This one just straight up goes to 0, which actually makes guarding differences, because 10k to a 0 actually makes 15k shield, rather than 10 to 1, which will be 10k to 1. So that already makes a huge difference, but also the part where it gives an additional skill, which of course the original Drajeweled doesn't have, and that part is a hit or miss depending on how you built the deck. If you're playing this as a pure Magnus deck, at the moment without the new Demonic Jewel Dragon from set 11, you're only going to get 4 attacks, and that does kind of suck, because you got self-restanding rearguards, and set 11 introduces another Demonic Jewel Dragon that is a self-restanding rearguard, but at the moment, there's no self-restanding rearguard for Demonic Jewel Dragons when it comes to set 10, so you are going to lose 1 attack if you're playing this as a Magnus build, and it was always the main debate that many people have when it comes to building this as pure Magnus or Ignis. And Ignis unlocks many other cards that are also very powerful for the deck, so that's why I'm still playing this as an Ignis deck. But when it comes to Drajeweled Magnus overall, it is definitely better than the original, other than maybe the Choice Soul Charge 2 at the ride phase, because that is an awkward timing, but combining with Ignis, that's actually pretty powerful. You do lose 1 Persona Ride if you're playing it as a Drajeweled Magnus deck, but that additional 5k buff does actually make those numbers especially more pressure, as this deck really hits offensively. And there's really not much to say other than it's just basically better than the original, and a bit of Ignis. In which now we go to the main deck, where we go to the Souls of the 5 Flames, the Drajeweled Ignis, the true demonic dragon, of course. So unfortunately this one is not a demonic jewel dragon, as it's a demonic jewel true dragon, so there's a difference in the name concept right there. You can only ride this on top of Drajeweled, which makes sense because the skills are very generic. But at the beginning of your battle phase, choose 2 cards from your draw zone and put them to soul. Then if you have at least 4 cards with different grades, plus 15k power to your whole front row. So that's already a total of the 10k power buff from what would have been Persona Ride, and the extra 5k that would have been the Drajeweled Magnus. So already it's already better because it's a consistent 15k power buff, rather than the regular drawing, and I prefer triple drive over the regular drawing in many ways, but also because of its next skill, where when this card attacks, you can Soul Blast 5 cards with different grades, and you can also use a Drajeweled to substitute for a grade 0 to 4, so you basically could just choose 4 different grades plus 1 Drajeweled as the final substitute grade, and then nuke your opponent's whole entire back row, change your opponent's power of all front row units to 0, and crit +1. So unlike the base grade 3 forms, where it's only the Vanguard, this one straight up drain your opponent's front row to 0, which does make a huge difference sometimes, although usually you won't be attacking into the rear guard, so it doesn't completely matter. But the nuking the back row is just very huge. It just strings down offensive attacks, and any pesky rearguards that your opponent can put back there. This does not choose what to retire, so that's also a very huge thing that it can go over resist. So yeah, while yes, it does cost 1 extra Soul Blast, it's very easy to get that extra soul, so it's not really much of an issue as well. But of course, you are not getting the extra rearguard drive check, but that doesn't really matter, as Ignis as a grade 4 unlocks his certain support engine as well, and his certain support engine is absurdly powerful that it's better to just keep it as grade 4 Drajeweled, especially with the extra power. Like this next card, Naturgio, because when discarded for grade 3 for the ride deck or stride, you draw a card, and then when placed at a certain circle, it gets one of these skills. So if it's on rearguard, you can combat 1 to draw a card and choose 2 cards from your draw zone to put to the bottom deck if your Vanguard is at least a grade 4, or if the revealed card that you have is a grade 4. or the other part where it's a 15k shield, which all of these have, if your Vanguard or the card that you revealed is at least a grade 4. And that's one of the cards that I already unlocked, that you basically unlock the Stride generics because you do play grade 4s in the deck, and thus this card is just a very good card to run, and thus one certain type of card has already been unlocked, and more choice soul charging the better. And into another new card, Drill. So when placed on Guardian, if you have a Drajeweled in your ride deck or your Vanguard's Drajeweled plus 5k shield, which is helpful right there. But the main skill is that when placed on Rearguard while your Vanguard's Drajeweled, you can Soul Charge 1 and Energy Blast 3 to call a card from your Soul to Rearguard with a different name from this one. So there's another card that does a superior call, except it's free. This one just costs energy, but there is a downside for the other one, but it doesn't really matter for most cases. But it's just additional option for you to superior call if you need it. But this is more so a Magnus support because of the second skill where once per turn, when this card attacks at least a grade 3 unit and you have at least 4 damage, this card's drive check becomes 2, and so because it's a grade 3 demonic jewel dragon and it's chosen by Magnus, and Magnus makes this as a drive 1, this card changes back to a drive 2, which is actually pretty powerful. But once again, if you're playing this as a Magnus deck, you are losing 1 attack as this is not a self-rearguard restander, which will be talked about later. But if you play this with Ignis, you can actually use this as a restanding rearguard. And then finally, one Risco Galer, because this was originally going to be a Drajeweled Magnus spot just for more Drajeweleds, but I actually kind of like having this card because on attack you can put a card from your hand to Soul to draw a card if you Soul Blast 4 more cards at the same time with your Vanguard's ability, and then also choose one of your opponent's rear guards to retire, which could even be the front row retires, just in case you Ignis your opponent's back row and then you can nuke something in the front, or in some cases early game retire, which is also very nice. That's why I just wanted to run this just in case for some additional options. And also there's ways to just choice soul charge this, but it's also not the very most important card while being a demonic jewel dragon, so that's why I just decided to run this as one of. But now to one of the newer cards that was back from set 8 is the demonic stone dragon Liznel Gore. So Liznel Gore is just like Raka Gore but better. Because just like Raka Gore, when this card attacks at least a grade 3 unit once per turn, while you have at least 4 cards with different grades from Soul plus 10k power into the end turn, which of course is very huge because first attack plus 10k and then Soul Blast 4, if you don't have the grades anymore, it wouldn't matter since you still get the plus 10k. But the second part is the same as Raka Gore practically, except for the one restriction, where when you Soul Blast 4 or more cards through Drajeweled's ability, you can Counter Blast 1 to restand this unit. Original Raka Gore is not restricted to Drajeweled, but it requires your opponent to be at least at grade 3 to restand. This one could just restand while your opponent's still at grade 2. So that's a huge improvement right there, especially on early game attackers. But also it has this one additional skill which the original Raka Gore doesn't have, and it's going to be exactly the same when it comes to the new grade 3 Ramula Jailer from set 11, because that one does exactly the same thing but also has the additional skill. But this one's additional skill is that when placed on rearguard while your Vanguard's Drajeweled, you can Energy Blast 3 to draw a card. While the other one, when being discarded, you can choose a card from your drop zone to put to Soul, and since it's a grade 3, you can self-Soul Charge it, which is also very huge because usually it's the grade 3 that you need. And that one was a restand rearguard which will be put in place of Risco Galer, but this one is a must play when it comes to Drajeweled decks because this one can be an early game attacker and also extra draw power for a deck that doesn't really use too much energy. And this was one of the cards I was talking about when it comes to either getting the drive check or the extra attack. Because if you're playing this at pure Magnus, you're not getting the extra attack unless you're playing Ignis at the moment, at least until set 11 comes out. And then we run a card that was back with Ignis, Zagon. So Zagon, just like Geogul, when placed on rearguard, you can Soul Charge 1, but if your Vanguard is at least a grade 4 Drajeweled or the card that you reveal from your hand is a grade 4 Drajeweled, you can superior call a card from your Soul, but at the end of turn it goes back to Soul. So it's just like Geo, but it's for free, but restricted to the grade 4. But this is completely fine because it's a free superior call that could refill up your board, and combining it with Geo can give you a +2, which is actually quite insane. But also it could become a booster while you have a Drajeweled Vanguard, which is also very nice because being a 10k booster can actually hit those numbers. That's why this is one of the better cards to run, as 1, you're not really giving up those rearguard extra attackers, and 2, this is also a booster, which can also help you out with some zoning placements that you might want. And then finally for my last grade 2, Valkyra. This was originally 3 of, but Now it's a 2-of since you don't really need this card as much anyway. But there's also the new promo that kind of works a little better because that one is when discarded, it can go to soul and on attack. Similar to this one, choose a card from a drop zone to put to soul, but this one has to attack at least a grade 3 unit, which kind of sucks. But this one, you choose a Dark State card from the drop zone and put it soul, and this card gets 5 key power for each grade of that unit, which also can make huge numbers, especially for a deck that is already very offensive. But it has the additional skill where at the end of turn, while your Vanguard is at least a grade 4, put this card to soul to draw a card, which also can refill its soul. And considering that you're soul blasting so often, especially when it comes to the high grade, this card re-soul charging it gets a lot of power, so I do kind of prefer running this over the new promo. But that's just personal preferences. This last grade 2 slot could be anything you prefer. And now to the grade 1, and it's the main card when it comes to the Ignis engine, Varpura. Because Varpura, when you soul blast 4 or more cards at the same time through your Vanguard's ability, you can put the soul to draw a card. Then if either your Vanguard or the card that you revealed is a grade 4 Drajeweled, and if you do not stand a card this turn, choose one of your rear guards and stand it. Basically, this just has to be the first restander, and then one of your Gors can just restand as the second restander, thus giving you 5 attacks on pretty much every Drajeweled turn in the most consistent way possible. Because as long as you're in grade 4 Drajeweled and you have this, you get 1 additional attack, and if you have one of your Gors, you can of course just get another restanding rear guard right there, thus giving you 2 different ways of restanding for 5 attacks. And this is what I mean when it comes to Magnus, because if you combine it with Magnus with the Ignis engine, you can get your 5 attacks very consistently in comparison to playing it at a pure Magnus deck where you cannot really run this at all. And this is just an engine that you just kind of have to run because it's just too good. So just more extra attacks with more pressure. And finally, because you playing this as an Ignis deck, I'm going to be running the Draco kit because Counterblast 1 on place, look at top 7 cards your deck for 1 grade 4 Drajeweled and add to your hand. But if you fail, you can reveal 1 grade 4 Drajeweled from your hand to draw a card. But it's more here just to search for your grade 4 Drajeweled as it's your most important card of the deck. So that's why I decided to run 3. Originally this was going to be 2, but the search is just too important, so I decided to run the 3rd copy. And finally 4 PGs because PGs. And then the one Regalis piece that was released with the Master Deck set, the Shroud in Darkness. You could run the grade 4 one if you want, but this one, if you did not ride from the deck this turn, you can play this without paying the cost, but the cost is Counterblast 1. So you choose 2 cards with different card names from each other, equal to the total grade of your Vanguard, and then call as many as you want, and then put the rest to soul. So if you call one, you put the other one to soul, or you could put 2 cards in soul, up to you. But this is just very good just to refill your board if you need to, and you can call up to a total of grade 4 most of the time, which those cards can also just give you more soul most of the time. It could even be Zagan or Geo, which can also be very huge. So yeah. And now to the trigger lineup. OT, pick whichever one you want. 8 crits for full on pressure. 3 draws because you really do need to draw your pieces, and this deck plays more offensively than giving you pluses. And also you're not really going to deck out too fast for this deck. And finally 4 heals, 2 being counters. And so that's it for this new deck profile on my new Drajeweled Magnus Ignis deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend? And what other changes would you make? So far I've been liking the deck how it is, as Magnus is just good, but not as good as Ignis, especially when it comes to Ignis's full-on engine. But with the new Demonic Jewel Dragon coming at set 11, it does in a way fix Magnus up a bit, as now that card just gives 5 attacks to Magnus, but with more counterblast issues, so you still need to be careful with the counterblast when it comes to that, in comparison to what you would play in Ignis, where you're not using as much counterblast actually, because Barbaros restand is free. But it is just personal preferences on what you prefer to play. Personally, I just prefer playing Ignis because Ignis is just awesome, while Magnus is just a mini Ignis, but better than the original Drajeweled. So that's how I decided to play the deck, and this is just how I personally like to build it. But once when the new Demonic Jewel Dragon comes out, I will be replacing few cards, but it's still going to be a Magnus Ignis deck. But overall, you can still change some ratios here and there, like play extra Magnus if you want more consistency and putting it to soul for the extra 5k power buff on your first grade 3 ride, but it's just personal preferences. But other than that, I just have to say, Ignis is just too good not to play, because Ignis has a very strong engine, and it also has additional stuff that kind of makes it a little better than having Drajeweled Magnus. But other than that, that's it for this, and see y'all next time.